He wore the uniform once, risked his life for the same country that now doubted him. A decorated veteran, proud yet humble, just trying to live in peace. But on one ordinary day, flashing lights turned his world upside down. Police closed in, cuffs clicked, and in seconds he was branded a criminal, without proof, without mercy. Only later would the truth explode through the walls of that station, shaking everyone inside. How could they arrest the wrong man? And what happened when the FBI stormed in for the real one? Marcus Johnson was no stranger to discipline. Years in the Army had taught him order, resilience, and pride. Neighbors called him the quiet hero, the man who mowed his elderly neighbor's lawn without being asked, the veteran who volunteered at the local community center. His days were simple now, mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons running errands, evenings flipping through photo albums of a past life spent in uniform. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, but he was respected. Yet, in America, respect has never been a shield. Marcus had grown used to the stares, the double takes in grocery stores, the moments when strangers crossed the street as he walked by. He brushed it off, telling himself it didn't matter. He had survived worse. But fate has a way of testing even the strongest. On that day, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the city, Marcus stepped out for a routine errand. His jacket zipped, his ID in his wallet, nothing unusual at all. What he couldn't see were the unmarked cars circling nearby, radios crackling with the wrong name, the wrong description. And in a world where seconds decide destinies, Marcus was about to pay the price for someone else's crime. The air outside the corner store was crisp, the kind of evening Marcus had walked through countless times before. But this time was different. Tires screeched against the pavement, and suddenly, red and blue lights splashed across his body. Doors slammed, radios crackled, and voices barked commands. "Hands up!" He froze, groceries still in his hands, his mind struggling to catch up with what his body was already doing. In seconds, he was surrounded. 3 officers closing in, eyes sharp, hands ready on their holsters. Marcus tried to speak, tried to explain. He told them his name, his address, that he was a veteran of this country. But it didn't matter. To them, he wasn't Marcus Johnson. He was a suspect. Their suspect. One officer shoved him against the hood of the cruiser, metal biting into his chest. Cold steel clamped around his wrists. He felt the humiliation burn hotter than the pain. People gathered on the sidewalk, some staring, some pulling out phones, but no one daring to step forward. Inside the station, the questions began, not the kind that sought truth, but the kind that assumed guilt. They threw a name at him, a crime he had never heard of, dates and places that had nothing to do with his life. Every protest he made was met with skepticism, every word twisted as if his very existence was a lie. The hours crawled by. Marcus sat in the holding cell, heart pounding, wondering how quickly a life could unravel. He thought of his service medals tucked away at home, of the sacrifices he had made for the very flag stitched on the uniforms of the men who now ignored his pleas. But the officers were restless. Something wasn't lining up. The file they held didn't quite match the man in front of them, and yet pride and pressure pushed them forward. They had made the arrest, and admitting a mistake wasn't an option. Then the building shook with urgency. The station doors burst open, heavy boots pounding against tile floors. The FBI stormed in, agents with sharper eyes, louder voices, and a name that carried weight. Their presence flipped the room from control to chaos. Marcus sat chained, watching it unfold, caught between relief and rage. Why had it taken federal agents to prove what he had been saying all along? Why wasn't his word enough? And just when it seemed like the nightmare might end, one of the officers glanced back at Marcus with a look he would never forget, not of apology, but of resentment. Because in their eyes, he hadn't just been the wrong man. He had been the wrong kind of man. The truth was out there now, pounding on the very walls of that station. But for Marcus, the question lingered. Would justice arrive in time, or had the damage already been done? The station erupted into chaos. Agents shouted over officers, papers scattered, radios screamed for silence. Marcus remained chained to the bench, his wrists raw, his back stiff, his voice hoarse from hours of pleading. He was invisible in plain sight, just another man in cuffs, powerless while men in suits debated his fate. Then it happened. An FBI agent marched forward, file in hand, eyes blazing. "This is not your guy." The words sliced through the tension, but instead of relief, Marcus felt his stomach twist, because no one moved. The cuffs stayed locked. The officers hesitated, staring at him as if the truth itself was inconvenient. He leaned forward, hope flickering in his chest. Maybe this nightmare would finally end. But the looks on their faces told another story. Pride, anger, and prejudice mixed into something more dangerous than a simple mistake. They weren't ready to let him go. Marcus's mind raced. He thought of all the black men before him whose lives had been stolen in these same moments. Men whose names became hashtags, whose families buried them under flags that didn't protect them. He realized in that chilling silence that his life hung in the balance of egos too stubborn to admit the truth. The room tightened, air heavy with unspoken rage. The FBI agents demanded his release, their voices rising, their authority pressing hard. The local officers dug in, hands resting near their belts, faces hard as stone. And there, in that standstill, Marcus understood the weight of his reality. He had survived war overseas, only to face a battle for his humanity at home. The world seemed to hold its breath. Would this be the moment justice finally broke through? Or would pride and prejudice win again? At last, the cuffs came off. The FBI's authority cut through the tension, forcing the officers to release Marcus. But freedom didn't feel like victory. His wrists were bruised, his dignity torn, and his trust in the system shattered. He walked out of that station a free man in body, but not in spirit, because what had been stolen from him couldn't be returned with a simple apology. Neighbors would whisper about what they'd seen, some assuming he must have done something wrong. Others would never forget the sight of him pinned against that cruiser, treated as guilty before he had a chance to breathe. For Marcus, the real wound was knowing this wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, one written into the very fabric of the country he once served. That night, as he sat alone in his living room, medals gleaming faintly in the corner, the question pressed heavy on his chest. How many times would his service, his sacrifice, his humanity be invisible because of the color of his skin? And Marcus knew he wasn't alone. His story was just one thread in a tapestry woven with centuries of injustice. For every wrongful arrest, for every life stolen too soon, there are countless more moments that never make the headlines. He had made it home that night, but millions before him never did. So the question lingers, echoing long after the sirens fade. How many more must suffer before the system truly changes? And when that moment comes, will we finally stand together? Or let history keep repeating itself?